Good evening, everybody. We are so excited to have you all today at our first webinar in English Without Borders Network launch campaign, which will run March 2nd till March 12th. And every day we are going to have very exciting and interesting webinars with our wonderful speakers who represent the best professional from the US and who are English language fellows, English language specialists, and who are linked with TESOL. And they will be sharing the best practices and the innovative methodology, as well as best teaching tips and skills. We'll pass over to you during the webinar, so you are welcome. So just a few rules for us to follow today's webinar and to make it more effective. So please use the chat box if you have any questions. We have here English Without Borders team. So Gulnoro, Niso, they will be assisting in running this session very smoothly. And we also do encourage you, please mute your microphone while we have the presentation of Mr. DJ Kaiser. And then we'll be having a Q&A session, question and answer session, where you can write your questions in the chat box, and please stay muted while the presentation is on. And if you would like to vocalize your question, then during the question and answer session, you can also vocalize your questions. So, okay, let's start then. So greetings from Tajikistan, Mr. DJ Kaiser. So we are very excited to have you today. And so I'll just briefly tell about Mr. Kaiser. So you can probably see his poster on our social media pages and on our website. And I'll briefly just share very focal points of his biography. So he's Associate Dean for the School of Education and Director of Teaching English as a Second Language at Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. And he currently serves as director for a 5-year National Professional Development Grant from the US Department of Education. So he, with his more than 2 decades in the field of English language teaching, he has delivered presentations, workshops, and seminars on language instruction, teaching pronunciation, language planning and policy, technology for education, and program development throughout the United States and in Mexico, Canada, China, Thailand, Vietnam, United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Spain, Greece, Holland, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and Ecuador. So in today's webinar, Mr. DJ Kaiser will be providing an overview of sounds in the English language and provide some really nice strategies for teaching them in classrooms. He will give an overview of the vowel sound of North American English, along with specific strategies for teaching vowel sounds. Consonant sounds will also be addressed with a focus on the W sound and the TH sounds in English. So the topic of priorities in teaching pronunciation pitches will also be addressed during today's webinar. So if you really want to make your pronunciation very beautiful and sound like Native American, so you're welcome. Now the floor is yours, Mr. DJ Kaiser. Please, you can start. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, and assalamu alaikum. I heard someone say assalamu alaikum, so I know that's the greeting in Uzbekistan. Don't want to make assumptions. So is that the greeting you also use in Tajikistan? Okay, if thumbs up if that is correct. All right, well, assalamu alaikum. Thank you. It's so great to be here with you for English Without Borders. Thank you for joining me. Again, my name's DJ Kaiser. And we're going to go through some teaching English pronunciation today. And so just a little bit on my background. So many thanks to Nasiba and the whole English Without Borders team for inviting me and for that introduction. So I've been the director of teaching English as a second language since 2011 at Webster University. And we have programs in the United States, in Uzbekistan, and in Kazakhstan. So I'm not a stranger to Central Asia. And so that makes me even more excited to be here with you for this project in Tajikistan. For more than 2 decades, I've been teaching English pronunciation and also how to teach English pronunciation. And I've done more than 24 conference presentations and seminars on teaching English pronunciation. So today, we're going to talk about considerations for teaching English pronunciation. Then we're going to focus on what are called segmentals. And we'll go into this a little bit more of this concept of segmentals. We'll talk about consonant sounds and focus on a few difficult consonant sounds and features, and then on vowel sounds and focus on modeling and practicing vowel sounds. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions also. So if you could kind of hold the questions until later, or they can go in the chat, and I believe we have someone who will be monitoring that. So one of the first things that we need to consider when we talk about teaching English pronunciation is kind of what are we teaching and what is the variety of English that we're going to teach, or the accent. So I'm going to show you some work or a chart of a concept developed by Braj Khatru, which divides English into these 3 circles. And so Braj Khatru talks about this inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circle in terms of these kinds of Englishes that we can teach. And so I'll wait to go into more details when I get to that slide. Then we need to talk about, are we teaching segmentals or are we teaching supra-segmentals? So supra means above. So segments, you've got these segmentals. These are the consonants and vowels that we put together to create words. And then supra-segmentals go above the segments. And so today we're going to focus on vowels and consonants because we don't have as much time. If we had more time, I would take you through things such as stress, a little bit about rhythm. If we had even more time, we could go through melody and phrase stress and intonation. I just want to let you know how much there is to cover for pronunciation, because as teachers, we need to make decisions about what we can focus on and also understand what we're focusing our time on and what we may not have time for, but also recognize how all of these features can play a role in our intelligibility and our pronunciation. So this concept of world Englishes comes from Braj Khatru. He coined this term back in 1985, so it's been around for a long time. The important thing to note here is world Englishes. So there's a plural on this. So what Braj Khatru is trying to say is there's not one English language, but rather there are multiple Englishes in the world. And he divided Englishes into these 3 concentric circles. So we have at the center the inner circle, and the inner circle is this variety where we tend to refer to native speakers. These are going to be countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada. So I've got a flag here for an example of the United States. Then we get to the outer circle. These are countries where they were British colonies, and English played a major part in their history and their education system, but it may not be part of the tradition of the country before colonization. And so there are Englishes that are spoken there that are native to those countries, but in the world, they're sometimes viewed differently, and there's a lot of political aspects behind this. India is a great example of this. So India, Singapore, Ghana. So these are countries that would fall into the outer circle. I'm sorry, into the expanding, outer circle, sorry. It's early here for me, so I'm still waking up. That's why I've got my coffee. So we've got the outer circle there. Now we're getting to the expanding circle. So expanding circle is going to be the rest of the world that is learning English. And so I've got here the Tajikistan flag, because you are part of this expanding circle. So generally we refer to this as English as a foreign language. That's sort of a traditional view of English. And so if we look at this, we need to think about what kind of English are we teaching? So are we teaching an English that is an inner circle variety, and can it only be that inner circle? Or are we teaching an English that we can use throughout the world in all of these circles? And what is the kind of English that is being used in Tajikistan in the expanding circle? It's also important to consider this because the majority of English speakers in the world are in the expanding circle. So you being in Tajikistan, you're actually part of the majority of English speakers. Me being from the inner circle, I'm actually part of the minority. So when we think about that, if we try to use a minority of speakers, fewer people speak the way that I do, and say this is how everyone needs to speak, that doesn't make as much sense as a variety that everyone can speak. So the kinds of Englishes that are spoken in the expanding circle are valid forms of English, and we want to make sure that you recognize that. And you all are playing an extremely important part of the English language with the Englishes that you speak in Tajikistan. So this is important because when we're teaching, we have to choose the kind of variety that we're going to use. If we're choosing an inner circle variety, so a lot of times people will look for native speakers. And I want to make it very clear, you do not need to be a native speaker to teach English or to teach English pronunciation. And the majority of English teachers in the world are quote unquote non-native speakers. So I want you all to believe that you can be good, competent, strong English teachers. But if you are choosing a model from the inner circle, then you need to consider, is this the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia? Again, as I've said, inner circle is not the only good model of pronunciation. So what we want to focus on here is this concept of intelligibility and comprehensibility. So are you intelligible? Can people understand what you're saying? And are you comprehensible? That means, can people comprehend what you are saying? So today we have these new models of English as a lingua franca. So English being used kind of as a trade language, English as an international language, or global English. So being in Central Asia, Russian has been used as a lingua franca, so a trade language. And English is now being used increasingly more as this trade language. So as you're speaking to other people in Central Asia, as you speak to people in other parts of the world, English is going to be used increasingly more for that. That's what this concept of English as a lingua franca or English as an international language refers to. So this is important to note because we've got two major approaches that are kind of at odds with each other. So we get this native speaker variety as a model. So this is one approach. And then there's another approach that's called the lingua franca core. And this comes from Jennifer Jenkins. And with the lingua franca core, this refers to what are the features of the English language that are most important in order to be understood to as many people as possible. So when we teach the lingua franca core, we reduce the features that we teach. Native speaker variety, we are teaching certain features of a particular variety that we've chosen. So in today's session, I am going to be focusing on features of North American English pronunciation. One of the reasons for this is it's a variety that is commonly found in movies and television shows that get shown throughout the world. What that does is it makes it a variety that is often more recognizable. And if people have familiarity with it, their ability to understand those features may be higher. I do want to point out that just because I'm a native speaker and just because I'm from the United States does not mean that everyone who speaks English finds it easier to understand me. There are other speakers who will be easier to understand for other speakers. So then in this session, I want to make sure we also know we're not going to focus on accuracy as much, but focusing on the idea of creating contrasts. So we need to make sure, do you understand the difference between these two sounds? And when I say words, are you understanding that this word is contrasted from another one? And again, just important, you do not need to sound like a native speaker. You don't need to sound American in order to have good pronunciation. We just need people to understand what you're saying. Okay. So let's start to focus on segmentals. So as I mentioned before, segmentals are consonants and vowel sounds. Then the suprasegmentals are these other features such as stress, rhythm, and intonation, which we will not have time for today. And okay, so I'm going to break this down to 3 things that we're going to focus on today, and then we'll see if we have time for questions at the end. And I always look forward to questions. So first, I'm going to provide an overview of articulatory phonetics. What that basically means is how are sounds made. So we're going to get into what I like to call the geography of the mouth. Then we'll talk a bit about teaching consonant sounds. And I'll take you through a few consonant sound features. And then we'll get into teaching North American vowel sounds. And I'm going to take you through something that's called modeled speaker utterances, which is an approach to teaching vowel sounds that I have developed. So this first part is providing an overview of articulatory phonetics. First thing that we need to know is that consonant and vowel sounds need to be taught differently. And I believe very strongly that our learners need to have a basic understanding of how sounds are made, so that any corrective feedback that we give can focus on modifying pronunciation. This is different than I say a word and I ask you to repeat it, and then I say, no, you're wrong. And so I'm asking you to repeat it again and repeat it again. So if we go through articulatory phonetics and how it's pronounced, then we can help our learners understand why a sound didn't come out the way that we were looking for it to come out. So with consonants, there are 3 things that we need to cover. One is the place of articulation. This has to do with which parts of the mouth are touching other parts of the mouth. The next is the manner of articulation. This is the air flow. So how is the air flowing out through our mouth? And then the third is voicing. And I'm going to talk a bit more about voicing and show you a way that you can model voicing for your learners. Then for vowels, we're looking for where our tongue is in the mouth. So we've got tongue height. Is the tongue high, mid, or low? Tongue frontness, is it front, central, or back? And then vowel length, is the vowel long or short? And actually it's more of a tense versus lax. And we'll talk about this in this session. We also in English can talk about lip rounding. You may notice if you're just watching me as I speak, and if you just watch my mouth, there are a lot of shapes that my mouth makes. And not all languages require that your mouth do as much, we'll call it gymnastics, of this constant movement. So that plays another role in creating the vowel sounds in English. So I like to call this Mr. Mouth. So this is a side diagram of a mouth, and we want to focus on the different parts of the mouth, the articulators. And so I will kind of take you through this. And what I like to do when I teach the parts of the mouth and the geography of the mouth is I like to start from the front of the mouth and then work backwards. And the reason for that is it's easier for us to touch feel and be aware of what's in the front of the mouth, and then we work back. So I want to start with what's familiar and then work backwards. So in the front, we've got the two lips. That should be pretty self-explanatory. And then after that, we have teeth. Again, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Now we get to the top of the mouth, and we want to break things down a little bit more, and this will be important to understand. Right behind your teeth, if you kind of take your tongue and you kind of feel right behind your teeth, there's a little bump that's there. That bump is known as the alveolar ridge. Some people call it the tooth ridge. So that little bump is important, especially when we look at consonants in English, especially if we're looking at the variety that I'm speaking. Behind the alveolar ridge, we have the hard palate. So there's this hard part of the mouth. If you take your tongue, you can kind of feel it. And then going further back, we have what's called the soft palate. The soft palate or the velum. Do not try to touch your soft palate or velum. That would not be a good thing. So that's when your back of your tongue is going to hit up there. So that's taking the roof of the mouth and we go forward to backwards. Then we've got the throat. So down here, the throat, where we breathe. We've got the vocal cords. So vocal cords are going to be down here. We're going to talk a bit more about the role that the vocal cords play when it comes to voicing. Now let's take a look at the tongue. The tongue we're going to divide into three different parts. So we've got the tongue tip, the tip of the tongue. The blade of the tongue is right behind that. And then we've got the back of the tongue. So tip, blade, and back. What's important to notice is we've got these three different parts of the tongue, and then we've got these different parts on the roof of the mouth. And so we've actually got the teeth, the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, and the soft palate. So different parts of our tongue, and generally the front parts of the tongue are going to be hitting the front parts of the roof of the mouth, and then the back parts in the back. But by bringing things slightly forward or slightly back, we can change these sounds. Then one other part to talk about is the nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is when we close everything here in the mouth and the air escapes through the nasal passage. So, this is when the nasal cavity plays a role. So these are the parts of the mouth. So that's place of articulation. Then we get to manner of articulation. This has to do with the airflow. So air comes from the lungs and comes out. And there are two major ways that we can look at airflow. The first is stops or plosives. So if you study in the United States, they're called stops. If you study in the United Kingdom, they're called plosives. And then around the rest of the world, it depends on which term they use. I tend to call them stops. These are sounds where you stop the air and then there's a release. So pa, ta, ka, ga. So those are stop consonants. We also have these sounds that are called affricates, ch and j. Some people refer to these as affricates, which they are. Some people put them into the stop category because it's easier to teach. So another thing we always need to consider is, do we do completely accurate as linguists would do, or do we use terms that are going to be easier for our learners? The other big category is continuance. This is where there's a continuous flow of air. So fricatives. Fricatives comes from the word for friction. So you can hear audible friction coming from my mouth. So sh, those are fricatives. Nasal sounds, these are continuants like and Then liquid sounds like our laterals, l and rhotics, the r, sound. And then what are known as approximates. So y and w, y and w. So they're kind of like consonants, kind of like vowels, but many people refer to those as approximates. So again, with that, I want you to consider, do we use these easier terms such as stops and continuance, or do we use more accurate terms when we are teaching pronunciation? And this is very important to know because I have found that teachers like to learn technical terms. And when they know this technical term, they want all their students to know that they know this technical term and for them to learn that technical term. But I ask, will that technical term help your learners with their pronunciation? If the answer is no, you may not want to teach it or focus as much on that. So if we can take a topic like, terms such as affricate and just put it into the category of stops, because we don't have as much time to teach pronunciation, we may be better off. But if you have more time and you're getting more into advanced pronunciation, then you can use those terms. Okay, then we get to consonant voicing. So consonants will be voiced or voiceless. And we're going to do a little exercise here. And so I'm going to ask people to go ahead and turn their cameras on if their cameras are off, so that I can watch and see what you're doing here. So we'll make this a bit participatory for those of you who are live with me in Zoom. If you're watching on Facebook, you can do this yourself. So I want you to take your hand and actually put it on your throat. So you can either do two hands here or one hand, whatever's going to work best. And as you do this, I want you to go S, and just make the S sound, go S, and see if you feel anything. Then I want you to go Z and feel. As you do Z, you should feel vibration. That is voicing. Oops. So yes, so we're modeling this now. So let's go between the two sounds and go S, 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 S. This is a very simple exercise that you can do with students. They can do it at home. A lot of self-monitoring for that. So if there are issues with a consonant being voiced or voiceless, there's a simple exercise you can do to raise the awareness of your learners of that voicing or lack of voicing. Okay, so with this, we get our consonant chart. So you'll see this consonant chart in books. And what many people might not realize is this chart is designed in such a way that it matches up with the geography of the mouth. So where it says bilabial, which is two lips, this is at the front of the mouth. And then we work backwards to labiodental, so f and v, teeth and lips, labio, lip, teeth, dental. Interdental, th and the, we'll talk about that in a bit. Then alveolar, this alveolar ridge behind the teeth, ta ta da da sa sa za za na na la la. Back into the palatal range. Many people call this post-alveolar. I like to call them palatal, cha ja sha ja. Back further to ka ga, and then back to the glottal or throat H. So what this chart does is it shows us in the mouth where these sounds are from front to back. It also shows us the manner of articulation. So starting at the top with the stop consonants, I've put the affricates in the same category as stop consonants. Some people separate them out. And then all of our different continuant sounds where there's a continuous airflow. This is important when we work with learners, because if we look at this chart and we're trying to teach a particular sound that's on the chart, if your learner is pronouncing a different sound, look at this chart and check to see, is that sound close to that sound on the chart? More often than not, they are geographically close to each other. Once we recognize that geographical closeness, that helps us understand why our learners are exchanging or kind of creating a sound that's between these two sounds. Then by understanding the features of pronunciation with the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, and the voicing, we could start to break down the specifics and explain how to create that consonant sound. That can help us differentiate. So I make this clear and explicit because a traditional way of teaching pronunciation has been, I say a word and you repeat it, or I say a sound and you repeat it, but our learners can get frustrated if they can't hear or they can't figure out why this difference or what this difference is. So articulatory phonetics is a way that we can use to help us understand and explain these differences. And if I had more time, we would actually go through all these different consonant sounds. I'm trying to give you this overview, but I want to take you through just a few things here. And I just explained this, why to describe consonants. Yes, so there's another good term to know is metacognitive awareness. So metacognitive awareness is when we are aware and we can think about what sounds we're using. So we just did an exercise where we did this raises your metacognitive awareness of voicing, because now you become metacognitively aware of whether a consonant is voiced or voiceless when you pronounce it, and you can test it out. Okay. So here I've got the chart side by side. So if you take a look at, we got Mr. Mouth and then our consonant chart, and it's sometimes helpful with our learners to just put those next to each other. Sometimes they'll put one on top of the other so that we get a sense of where in the mouth these sounds are. It's also important to know that the sound chart helps us show relative location. So this isn't absolute. And the chart also helps show what is similar between different sounds in terms of their manner of articulation and their voicing. And so this is a great thing to use in pronunciation classes, but you do have to do that overview of the consonant sounds. So some different consonant issues that are possible to go through. English t and d are alveolar sounds, and I want to talk about this just a little bit. L and R can be difficult for some speakers. English uses 4 palatal, also known as post-alveolar sounds, the sh, zh, ch, and j, which I believe the Tajik language has. Ba versus va and pa versus fa can be difficult for some learners. And then th and the, I find, are sounds that don't exist in most languages. So I will take just a little bit of time on that. We don't have as much time today, so we're just going to focus on a few contrasts. And so I want to take a look at the English alveolar stops, t and da, and we're going to combine that with the feature of aspiration for English stop consonants, and then just do a little bit on th and the. And I want to make it clear, you do not need to make the th and the sound in order to be intelligible. You can get by your entire life speaking English, and you can have everybody understand you without making the th and the sound. But I know that some people want to try to learn it, so I'll cover it briefly. So for your advanced learners, you've got something that you can work with, but please don't spend too much time teaching it, because you may, it may be frustrating for some of your learners. So, and we'll practice a few ways to help teach these sounds also. So get ready to participate. So the alveolar stop consonants. So ta and da. Ta and da exist in most languages in the world. So we often don't even think about teaching ta and da. There's a slight difference in the place of articulation between languages. So I speak Spanish and Catalan, so I'm trilingual. And in Spanish and Catalan, ta and da are actually ta and da, ta and da. So ta, da, ta, da, ta, da, ta, da. So I'm going back and forth between them. There are some slight differences there. As a result, it can, at times, cause some difficulty with people understanding a word. We can usually repeat or give context in order to make ourselves comprehensible, but sometimes we want to do a little bit more work on it. So with the t and da sounds, I want you all just right now to go and do ta 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 da 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 ta 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 da 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 da. And I want you to raise your metacognitive awareness and think, where is your tongue? So go ahead and just go ta 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 da 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 ta 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 da da da. And in the chat, if you're on Zoom, in the chat, I want you to type what is touching what? Is the tip of your tongue touching the back of your teeth? Or is the tip of your tongue touching the ridge behind your teeth? So take a moment and again, do the ta 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 da 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 da, and the way that you make these sounds. So we're looking at how you make these sounds. And I want to see where you are putting your tongue. I got one response so far. This is also really good for me because this helps me understand, and it's like an assessment. So I'm getting data from you as students. Let's see if we can get a few more responses in the chat if you're on Zoom. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you could just do this exercise yourself and use this to raise your metacognitive awareness. Okay, so we're getting the tooth ridge, the tip of the tongue is on the ridge. Okay, so it may be that when you're speaking, it is further back. Okay, that's good to know. If you are working with speakers of other languages than your language, you may find that there is some variety with that. But what I want to spend more time on, which is going to be a bigger issue, is aspiration. So I find that aspiration is really one of these features that can make a difference in comprehensibility at times. So we've got these sounds pa, ta, cha, and ka. So I want to make this clear. Cha is an affricate, but pedagogically, I like to teach the affricates along with the stops because aspiration occurs with voiceless stops, but it also occurs with the cha sound, which is an affricate. So if we put it in that stop category, then we get this aspiration. So we get this aspiration, this little puff of air, this ha, when we have pa, ta, cha, or ka before a stressed vowel. And so I'll show you what this looks like. So we get pay, tripe, and coping. Pay, tripe, and coping. We'll get this puff of air. And so this aspiration, when we want to represent this, we can use this small h. So this superscript h shows this puff of air, this ha. Now, one thing that happens is English has a lot of consonant clusters, and when we put an S before one of these stop consonants, it will actually block and prevent this puff of air. So we get pay with the puff of air, but spay where there's no puff of air. Tripe with the puff of air, but stripe with no puff of air. Coping with that puff of air aspiration, and scoping without that aspiration. So here we've got S's blocking that. And it's also important to know that we can have an R or an L sound after, as we see here with stripe, and we can still get that aspiration. So this is a feature that can actually cause differences in understanding words. And it's such a minute thing, but we often don't think to teach it. So there's this thing that's called voice onset timing. And this is the time from when we release a stop to when our vocal cords start to vibrate for the vowel afterwards. So remember we did that exercise with voicing, with the s, s, s. What happens is we release a consonant, here a voiceless consonant, and there's no voicing for a short period of time for the aspiration, and then our vocal cords start to vibrate for the vowel. It's very minute, but speakers hear this, and that can play a role in understanding different consonants. So if we start to compare different languages with this voice onset timing, the amount of time, how long this kind of puff of air is, or how long it is before we get the voicing, this can change how we hear sounds. So I've got a chart here that contrasts English, French, and the Thai language. So with this, you may want to consider where the Tajik stop consonants may fit in relation to these examples. But now we want to get into the actual exercise for how we can do this. So this is another participatory piece for you to do. So what we're going to do is take a piece of paper, or I'm going to take a tissue. So I got a box of Kleenex here. And what I want you to do is actually hold it up, and you can do this so if we're face-to-face now during COVID, this is not something that we could do because people will be wearing face masks. So if you are in a place where you are wearing a face mask, you won't be able to do this now. But when you are back in the privacy of your own room, you can do this. If you are by yourself and you've got a tissue, or you could take a piece of paper and hold it up, you can also do that. What we're going to do is just kind of model. And so I'm going to hold this up. I'm going to make it so you can kind of see me too, and go pot, pot, pot. And if you see, it's actually moving. And then we're going to go spot, spot, pot, spot, pot, spot. So if you've got your Kleenex or paper, go ahead and do this. And then top, stop, top, stop, top, stop. So we saw that the p had a big puff of air. And we get chop, chop, chop. So that one does move it. Coop, coop, scoop, scoop. So notice how the S then blocks, and we do not get that aspiration. So this is a good kind of activity that we could do when we're looking at aspiration, because you can visually see. So in a classroom, you can visually see it. Your students can do this at home. If you are teaching remotely, you can have people do short videos, so they can send you a short video of them doing it on WhatsApp. So there are a lot of ways that we can do this in integrating technology. So this is important because some learners can struggle with this place of articulation of dental versus alveolar. And again, if we can understand, not an issue, let it go. But others, if that aspiration, if that voice onset timing is off enough, what happens is the t sound sounds like a d sound. And I have heard this happen. And because these sounds occur so frequently, this may be an issue that we want to address. Okay, so I need to start rushing through because we've got less time. So let's do just a little bit on interdentals. When I teach interdentals, what I like to do with students is get them to be comfortable with their tongue. And in some cultures, it's rude to stick your tongue out. And I say when we're speaking English, you do see your tongue if you speak a variety that uses these sounds. Not all varieties do. So I have my students just stick their tongue out, go, and I know it feels rude to some people. A lot of times my students will laugh. And when they laugh, they get less nervous. But then we do something that is called the thumb and finger test. So if you take your thumb and your finger like this, if you are wearing a face covering, you will not be able to do this. So if you're in an environment where people are wearing face coverings, that will not be possible. But again, this is something you can assign at home. You take your thumb and your finger and you put them on your teeth. So you actually put it on your teeth. And then when you make the TH sound, so we're going to say, I like using this, that, these, and those. We're going to go this, that, these, those. When you make those sounds, you should be able to feel your tongue with both the thumb and the finger. This, that, these, those. If you cannot feel your tongue, you're going this, that, these, those. That means your tongue's not coming out. If you can glide the tongue, that's out too far. And I do have students who end up going this, that, these, those. This is why I use the thumb and finger test, because it prevents us from over exaggerating this sound. Another thing we can do is to look at yourself in the mirror, or if you just take your phone and use sort of like the selfie camera. So right here, this, that, these, those. I'm able to see my tongue. If I get a little bit closer to the camera here, you'll be able to, I can model this, that, these, those. Another thing we can do is to convert from the s to the th. So we go s, 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 s. For the th sound, we go z, 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 z. A lot of the exercises that I do, and I have some of these on YouTube, is taking sounds that are geographically close to each other on that chart. So that's why I first went through that chart, and then do exercises to convert those sounds. Okay, so time is running. So when you're teaching segmentals, make sure that you're also being mindful of careful speech versus free speech for consonants. This is important because if you do teach a sound like th and the, your students may be able to make it in isolation, but what we really need is to be able to make these sounds in free speech. Okay, so let's move over to vowels. So quick quiz, how many vowel sounds are there in the English language? And type your answer into the chat. So we're getting some answers here. Getting 6, I'm getting 20. And in the interest of time, I'm going to show you the answer. So most varieties of general American English have 17 distinct vowel sounds, 15 stressed vowel sounds, and then 2 unstressed vowels. So some of you may have been thinking of A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Some people are thinking about the long and the short vowels. So for vowel sounds, we've got our tongue height, tongue frontness, and then length. We can also do lip rounding. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip ahead so we can get to actually modeling these. Spanish is a 5-vowel system where American English has 17-vowel system. We have stressed and unstressed vowels, and then we have lax and tense vowels. And I'll take you through tense and lax. And then what I like to call shifting vowels, which are more technically known as diphthongs. So I did a little bit of research on vowels in the Tajik language. So the Persian vowel system and Tajik vowels I've got here. So they're somewhat similar in these charts. So as you see, there's 6 vowel sounds according to these charts in Tajik as compared to 17 in English. So that's a big difference. So vowel sounds are often going to be more of an issue for our learners. As a result, when I teach, I often spend more time on vowel sounds than I do on consonant sounds. Consonants are easier to teach, and that's why people like to spend more time on consonants, but vowel sounds will help you more in my experience. British, this is what the British sounds look like. There are actually 2 charts, and when I see this chart, for me, it looks a little complex. So when it comes to teaching, these are a lot of sounds. And again, this is a naturally occurring variety. But then if we get to North American vowels, this is the chart. This is a lot of sounds, but this is the chart that I use when I teach pronunciation. And I'm going to take you through these sounds. Then we get these 3, what I like to call shifting vowel sounds. So we're basically going from I, oi, and ow. But let me get to how we model these. And that's where we will spend more of our time. So we often hear about long and short vowels in English. It's important to also know that there's a difference between tense and lax. So tense and lax sounds. So there's this distinction between E and I, long and short. But what happens is we can't just go with long and short. We also need to deal with tense and lax. So there's an exercise that I like to do, which is a hand squeezing exercise. So again, for all of you watching, I want you to take your hands and I want you to have them by your throat here. And we're going to do the words bead and bid because they're similar and we need to contrast them. And when we say the word bead, we're going to squeeze our hands. And when we squeeze our hands, we're also squeezing the muscles that are in the sides of our neck. When we say bid, we're going to release the hands and we're going to release the muscles here in the side of our throat. So we're going to go bead, bid, bead, bid, bead, bid, e. What we're trying to do here is raise our metacognitive awareness of this squeezing, making it more tense, and then relaxing for it being lax. I also do an exercise where we go e. So I call this the rowing exercise, e. So what we're trying to do is use physicalizations that help raise our awareness of what's going on in all of our articulators to make these sounds. Then we get the eh versus ah sound. This is another one that's difficult because English has so many vowels that we actually have to drop our jaw in order to make all of the sounds, all the contrast that we need. So we get eh versus ah, eh versus ah. And a lot of people who are learning English vowels will end up using a similar or the same sound. So we're going to use the words ed and ad. And one of the things we could do is we just take our fingers and put them here. And just if you kind of go up and down, and if you go ed, ad, ed, ad, ed, ad, ed, ad, you should feel the jaw dropping. But here's an even better way to do it. So we're going to use our finger. If I go ed, 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 I cannot stick my finger between my teeth. Add, 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 add. My finger can go all the way between the teeth. So ed, add, ed, add. So I call this the finger gauge. So it's a very simple activity that lets us know if we have been, okay, and I know we got to do questions. So let me do one quick thing that we're going to model. So what I've done is I've taken vowel sounds and I've paired them up with what I call speaker utterances. So I'm going to take you through these. And so I want you to repeat after me. I want you guys to be able to see this. For the long E sound, we're going to go wee, as in this is fun. So we're going to go wee, wee, and we actually end up spreading the lips. For short I, we do something like ick, like that doesn't taste good, ick. For long A, we go hey, as in hey you, hey. Short A, we do like this I really don't care. Short A, we do this yeah, as in yeah, that's cool. Short O, we do ah, as in ah, now I understand. Short U, we do this when I don't understand, I just go Short back O, we do this aw, like if something is cute, aw, look at the cute little puppy. Long O, it's as if we're surprised. Oh, I'm surprised here. Short back U, if we think of Tarzan and we kind of go, this sound. Long U, we do this ooh, that's very pretty. Short back U with R, we do this grr, like a tiger, grr, grr, grr. Long I, I'm saying hello to you and I go hi, hi. For the oi sound, like a pirate land ahoy. And then if you drop something on my foot, I will go ouch. So what I do is I have this chart and I will take people through and let's just very quickly go through. You can repeat after me, wee. And then we're going to do ick. And then hey. And then eh. And then yeah. Then going down to the bottom, ah. Come back around the back, aw. Oh. Ooh. Then in the middle, and grr. And then for the shifting vowels, hi, ahoy, and ouch. So I like to use these because people tend to mispronounce words. And so by using these utterances, we focus on kind of the meaning that we can associate with the utterance and focus on that sound. And I find it's a bit more fun to do that. Okay. There's never enough time. So just remember that teaching English pronunciation is not about accuracy, and it's not about sounding like a native speaker. You do not need to sound like me to be a great English speaker or to be a great English pronunciation teacher. You need to feel comfortable and confident, and people need to be able to understand you. Just remember, everyone has an accent, and that's an important part of our identity. And as I said, make people feel comfortable and confident. Don't spend too much time on th and the. Give it maybe 5 minutes, and then move on to something that will help more. Okay. I want to make sure that we have time for questions, and I can stay after a little. And I apologize it takes so long. There's always so much to cover.
Mr. DJ Kaiser, so it was very interesting. So using this moment, I would like to welcome our Facebook followers as well. So nice that you are with us during the webinar. And it reminded me about very important things that we need to follow while teaching pronunciation to our students. So we have a number of questions here. So we would like to vocalize those questions. So please, dear participants, you can type in your questions in the chat box. So we'll be able to read and just vocalize them. And then Mr. DJ Kaiser would be responding to that. So the first question which we have here is about,
Hi,
could you take
my name is DJ Kaiser. Welcome to my...
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, okay. So we have a number of questions here. So the first question here is about, just a moment, I'm just scrolling up. Okay, what fun exercises do you do with your students to teach the pronunciation of th and the consonants?
So the th and the sound, the interdental sounds? So the th and the, that is going to be the thumb and finger gauge that I did. So the the, and the. And so what I did is in the chat in Zoom, and I'm also going to do it in the comments on Facebook, I'm going to share my YouTube channel link. And I have a whole video on teaching the TH sound, the th and the sounds. So I just shared that both in Zoom, in the chat, and then also on Facebook. And I see we've got a question here. How many minutes would you recommend to spend for phonetics and practical courses for English? That's a really good question. A lot of it comes down to how much time do you have. So I have taught entire pronunciation classes where I've got a full hour or I've got 2 hours with students. If I'm teaching a listening speaking class, what I might do is take 5 to 10 minutes a class period or a week to teach pronunciation. Sometimes people will do just a pronunciation unit where they've got 16 weeks and they'll say, we're going to spend 2 weeks on pronunciation. I would not recommend going that direction because pronunciation is something you need to work on over a longer period of time. So today I was given 1 hour to go through a lot of stuff. I wouldn't teach in this way. I would, on one day, take you through the aspiration. And on another day, we would do the E versus I. And on another day, we would be doing the finger gauge. So by spreading it out in shorter periods of time, and then asking students to go home and practice it, that will be more beneficial. seeing if there are other questions. I'm also able to look at Facebook here. So
yeah. So there is another question. So are there any dictionaries having this phonetic symbol? So that's a question from one of the participants. So I'm curious about that. Do we have such kind of dictionaries that have the phonetic symbol of
Oh, that's such a good question. And it's such a complex question. Wow. There's so many different ways to transcribe. And if I had more time, I actually have materials on teaching transcription. And should we teach transcription? How do we teach transcription? Part of it has to do with what are the level of your learners? So are you teaching young learners? Are you teaching adults? If you're teaching adults, have the adult learners gone through a phonetics and phonology course? In some countries, you have to study phonetics and phonology of your own language. So then you have a base when you're learning another language. And then you can use International Phonetic Alphabet. Dictionaries don't always use the kind of transcriptions and symbols that are the most helpful for teaching pronunciation. It depends on the dictionary. And I have taught transcription to students, and when they go and use a dictionary, they often run into more problems because each dictionary and each book tends to use a slightly different kind of transcription system. And this always frustrates students and it frustrates professors. And it makes it hard for us when we teach pronunciation because there's usually not one book that has everything. So we need to use multiple materials and there's no consistency in that transcription. So you ask such a good, intelligent question that has no easy answer. And I love those kinds of questions because it shows how complex and difficult the work is that we do. Wow, good question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. We have another question. Our participant, Madina Sidikova, she's asking, like, can you please suggest some lip rounding exercises?
Yes, lip rounding. So what happens is, this is the way I like to describe it, is let's imagine, so in the United States, we've got a show that's called Dancing with the Stars. So you take different famous people and they are paired up with professional dancers and they have to do ballroom dance and Latin dance and different forms of dance. Let's say that you take someone who is an Olympic swimmer. So that swimmer is always in the pool and they have developed certain muscles and that muscle memory is there and they are a top athlete. They're very good at what they're doing. Now you throw them on the dance floor and you ask them to use their muscles in a new way. All of a sudden, they can't do that. And it seems like they're not an athlete at all, but really they are. It's just their muscles are working differently. When we move from one language to another, the exact same thing is happening. So the language that you speak, your mouth and all your muscles are trained to do those sounds. When you go and do another one, you're going to be pulling on a different set of muscles. English does require that there's a lot more lip movement. And so an exercise that I like to do to warm up the mouth and make sure that we can do all the sounds is we go ooh wee ooh ah ooh wee ooh ah ooh wee ooh ah. So it's this very simple, and I am exaggerating it, but by exaggerating it, what I'm trying to do is train my mouth and train the mouth of my learners to be doing this full range of shapes. And part of that is, if you take a look at that comparison of the Persian and Tajik vowel chart and then the English vowel chart, there's so many more vowels in English. The only way that we can get those extra vowels and make those contrasts is essentially to create more space in our mouth. And the way that we create more space in our mouth is by doing things such as spreading our lips, E, dropping our jaw for ah, rounding our lips for aw. So all these shapes that are there, and by doing ooh, wee, ooh, ah, ooh, e, this is the E, wee sound. Ooh, this is an ooh, that's pretty. Ooh, wee, ooh, ah. This is the ah, open up and say ah sound. So this ooh, wee, ooh, ah is a great exercise that you can do to practice that. It will also help you with the W sound. So the what. So ooh, wee, ooh, ah, ooh, wee. And when you do that, ooh, wee, if we exaggerate it a little bit more, when we go from the wee, that is the W consonant. So remember, the W consonant is an approximate, so it's kind of like a vowel with this wee. Good question. I like that. This is interesting and funny. I do like that. I like when things are also kind of funny, because if we can make doing this humorous, it's enjoyable. Pronunciation should be fun.
Yeah, agree, completely agree. So because learning should be fun and teaching as well should be fun. So we have a number of questions here. So one of the participants, she's asking, like, how many minutes would you recommend to spend for phonetics in practical courses of English? So this is something that should be kind of not boring for students, and also should be fun. I mean, the participant is seeking some of the really useful tips that you would share from your own experience.
Yeah, and it comes back to my previous answer. It really depends on how much time you have, what's the level of your students. My recommendation might be to start out with 5 minutes of class time. It's by doing things and kind of spreading them out, that helps. You may need to spend more time, like a half an hour on pronunciation in another class. What I've been trying to do is, and I've got some videos that are on YouTube, so I shared that link. One of my goals is to create more videos. So hopefully I'll get time to create more. I've got another project coming up where I'll probably be creating some. So check back for more. And the goal is to keep things kind of short. So we focus on this. This makes things a little bit difficult because, you know, here we've got an hour and I'm trying to take you through material that I would never cover with learners in the same amount of time. I would definitely spread this out over multiple weeks. And some of the topics that I covered today, I wouldn't start with, but some of the topics that I would start with take more time. So if I took more time to do them, then you get to see less of what we can teach. So again, that's another really complex question.
Okay, Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your link to your YouTube channel. So I think just, you know, many of our participants would go there and watch your videos. And we have one more question here from our Facebook follower. Mm-hmm. So Bakhtir Daulat Murodov, he's asking like, phonetics is hard to teach to students as there are lots of sounds. Could you share tips or strategies on how to teach it in context?
Okay, that's a really good question. So yes, phonetics is difficult. So if you're talking about the transcription, so sometimes transcription gets really difficult to teach because you're teaching another alphabet to people. So there are pedagogical symbols that you can use. So if you're doing, so what some people will do is for ch, they'll use ch together. When you're doing the sh sound, you'll do s and put a little caret on top of it. The same with the zh sound. So what you're doing is you're not teaching a whole other transcription system, but you're teaching something that's close to the letters that are used. The same thing with vowels, because transcription of vowels can be really difficult when you're learning the transcription system. So what I have done is at times I've used, so short A will be A, and then long A will have a line over it. And the line over it is the long A. So they're pedagogical symbols. So if you look for pedagogical transcription and choose that, that can be helpful. The reason for that is it helps for the letter to sound connection. It's not always accurate, but once you know the Roman alphabet and how to use it, it is closer. And so again, that comes down to time that you have and the level of learners. If I'm working with younger learners, I don't like to use IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. It's like learning another alphabet. It's like me trying to read Cyrillic. I still have a lot of trouble reading words that are written in Cyrillic. There's certain letters I know right away. Otherwise, I need a chart to look at it. Your learners may feel that way with IPA. So that comes down to how much time do you have, who are your learners, your context. So again, you guys are asking such good questions. I love this. This is fun for me. So thank you. I hope that gives a good enough answer. Any other questions?
Yes, Dr. Kaiser, there was a question from Bakhti Begi, who is asking, should we skip the rule that there are 20 vowel sounds?
So I think what it's going to come down to is what variety of English are you teaching? So depending on the variety you teach, the number of vowels will be different. So the question that I asked is how many vowels are there in General American English? And there are 17, many varieties have 17 vowels. There are some speakers in North America where aw and ah are the same sound, and so they've got 16 vowels. So dawn and dawn, it's dawn and dawn. So there's not a distinction between those two. Those are two names in English. So that would be a 16 vowel system. British English is going to have more vowel sounds. So in terms of that number, you have to choose what is the model that you're using. So when I teach and ask the number of vowels, I ask that question not because there's a definitive answer and everyone has to agree that there's 17 vowels. That is not the reason. So I'm glad we're getting this question so I can clarify. The reason I ask that is when I ask this of students, what I often get is there are 5 vowel sounds. When a student says there's 5 vowel sounds, that helps me understand they're thinking about 5 vowel letters. If a student says there are 10 vowel sounds, that helps me understand that a student is thinking there are 5 vowel letters and there's long and short A, E, I, O, and U. And then I need to help instruct that there's more than the 10 vowels. So you do not need to change the number of vowels that you have on your chart. Now, if you are working with a vowel chart that has 20 vowels, and if you're going to use the modeled speaker utterances, you will need other utterances for those other sounds. Because North American English is there are a lot of materials that are already developed that support teaching pronunciation that's modeled on General American or North American English. That's why I chose those vowels to do. It's also the variety that I speak. So if I'm modeling a variety that I speak, that's what I can use. But in my materials, I also talk about, because I've got an article published on it, that you need to modify it if the variety you're teaching is different. That's a really good question. Smart teachers, this is so awesome. This is great to see. Smart teachers, smart questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaiser. There is a question from Firuz. He's asking, could you please share this presentation or publish it in another website, English Without Borders website? Is it possible to do that?
So I know that so it's going on Facebook Live. Will this get archived then for viewing later?
Yeah, I mean, just, right after the webinar maybe, or just, tomorrow, the latest we can do that.
Yeah, we'll do that. And then also if so on YouTube, you'll be able to find other presentations that I've done on pronunciation. And so you can look, and sometimes I've got 2 hours or I've got longer. So there are other, I've done these multiple times, and it's, here I love the questions that I'm getting, because I'm getting some questions that I don't usually get, which is great.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have one more. I believe that this is the last question. So Said Muddin Azizov, he is wondering, what is the difference between glottal T and silent T?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What is the difference between glottal T and silent T? Both are sound T, but one of them is glottal, another one is silent.
Okay, good. So this is getting to, this is a concept of phoneme versus allophone. So phoneme is the sound as it exists in a system and kind of in your brain. So there's the T sound. Then there are these allophones. So allophones are different kinds of ways that you can pronounce it in different environments, they're called in linguistics. So an environment is it at the beginning of the word? Is it before a stressed vowel? Is it before a unstressed vowel? Is it between vowels? Is it at the end of a word? Is it at the end of a syllable? All of these environments can change how the sound T gets pronounced. So if we take, for example, top, so top, there that's going to be aspirated. Then when we do stop, that's going to be non-aspirated. Then if we get the word gutter, then there it is a tap. And for some people, it sounds like a D sound. If we have the word bottle, there that's a glottal stop, and it depends on your variety. So I would say bottle. So I use a tap sound in my variety. In some varieties, it will be bottle. So that's the glottal stop. And then if it's at the end of a word, pot, it is an unreleased stop. So notice it's pot. I'm not saying patta, it's just pot. So this T sound, the phoneme, has multiple allophones. The allophones can differ based on the variety that you are speaking. So I don't use the glottal stop in my variety of English. But it is a naturally occurring allophone in many varieties of English. So, and I actually do teach about it in classes, because just because I don't pronounce it doesn't mean it's not worth teaching, because it is naturally occurring with that. So that requires a bit more time in a classroom to go through, because there are these questions that we can ask, but in order to answer those questions, sometimes we've got to teach a bigger concept. So notice you asked me about the difference between the t and the glottal stop, and I can't just give you an answer to that. I've got to give you a bigger answer about phonemes and allophones. So once we understand this bigger idea of phonemes and allophones, then we can start to answer that. And this is one of the things that makes teaching pronunciation challenging, is that there are many fundamental concepts that we have to understand to help us answer smaller questions. And I have slides that actually go through that. I just didn't cover them in this because we didn't have as much time.
Thank you very much. So we have so many thank you notes and thank you feedback from our participants on Zoom. And we also have lots of thank you notes on Facebook Live. So I also encourage our Facebook followers to use the chat box and write down their questions. And I believe that so after we post the recording of today's webinar, I assume there will be more people who will be asking you questions, Dr. Kaiser. So, and would you mind responding them later? I mean, just, you know, in a day or so,
Sure.
you know, by the time that when people will be watching the recording.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. So, so yeah, thank you very much. I would just remind our audience, both on the Facebook and also Zoom. So today we had a webinar on teaching English pronunciation with Dr. DJ Kaiser. So we've got so useful insights about how to teach English pronunciation. And on behalf of all our participants and also our team, I would like to thank you once again for your wonderful presentation and very good strategies you shared today with our participants.
My pleasure.